My name is Wilks Wood. I'm a current PhD student at Mississippi State University under Dr. Jason Cruz, who was the past irrigation specialist there. And today we're going to cover a lot of the data that we've been going over the past several years, and kind of give a cumulative overview for some agronomic practices and irrigation management strategies that optimize soybean water use efficiency. And then following me up, Mr. Clements is going to come up and talk about some on-farm applications that he's been able to utilize with these various programs, things of that nature. So, all right.
We ain't figured out how to work that door. It's got this thing on the bottom of it. We ain't figured out how to work it.
They can be tricky. All right, so as I'm sure everyone in this room is aware, we are currently in a kind of a water scarcity crisis. And in 2007, a research team came together and utilizing computer modeling, they were able to determine if we were to continue with the same practices that we currently had at that time, if we were to stay on that same path, the effects in 30 years would be crippling and devastating to our area, with 3 very distinct cones of depression forming and growing even more than they currently already are. So that's why we are so interested in irrigation management and being able to utilize and conserve this natural resource. So we have a noted aquifer decline that has been documented for over 40 years. We have permitted values. Currently we're at 18 acre inches per year for corn, soybean, and cotton. And then I think rice is 36 acre inches a year, if I recall. And currently there's volunteer metering programs. Within the first year, I think it was 5%, and then that was increased to 10% the following year, and our producers have done a great job of implementing that, so hats off to them. But we're still going to be looking at potentially very increased regulations in the years to come, so we're needing to jump out ahead of this and determine our best management practices to conserve the Mississippi River Valley Alluvial aquifer. So to start, I want to kind of give a brief background of a study that was done before I jump into some of the results that we've done. So the University of Arkansas conducted a study, and it ranged across, I think, Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and parts of Mississippi. And it was a 3 or 4 year study, if I recall. And they were looking at the effect that planting date has on various maturity groups from a yield standpoint. So along the bottom axis, the different maturity groups they use range from 3 up to a group 6. And then on this y-axis is the percent of the total yield that each maturity group was able to achieve within those planting dates. And the planting dates are shown in this legend. And as numerous researchers have shown, specifically a lot of entomology work has been done, that our best yield capabilities are in this early planting date. That's when these maturity groups are able to obtain the most amount of yield. And then with each successive planting date, there's yield decreases. That's to be expected, and that is what we've been seeing for numerous years. So we wanted to take this kind of layout in this study and look at it from an irrigation management standpoint. So we utilized 3 different planting dates: an early, which was typically around April 25th, which is very much within an early planting date window for our area; then a mid planting date, which was about May 15th in 3 years; and then the late planting date was the 1st of June. And we utilized a group 3, a group 4, and a group 5. And we wanted to see how these different maturity groups reacted, not only in terms of yield, but also irrigation water use efficiency. So moving on to yield. With our 3 year study, we saw very similar results as the University of Arkansas study, with each successive planting date having decreased amounts of yield. And to start off, within the early planting date, the group 4 and the group 5 were not different from one another, but both did significantly better than the group 3. Again, it kind of as to be expected. Fuller season variety is able to put on some more yield than that early maturing variety. But then in this mid planting date, the group 4 did significantly better than the other 2 maturity groups. And I want to really point out that this group 5, by just waiting 2 weeks to plant consistently over 3 years, you're looking at over a 20 bushel decrease just by those 2 weeks. And then lastly, within the late planting date, there's no differences in yield among our maturity groups. So taking this further to look at water use efficiency, and that is simply the yield that we obtain for each maturity group divided by the amount of water it took to obtain that yield. So what we're left with is the amount of bushels we made per each acre inch of water that we applied to that treatment. And follows the same trend. Our highest water use efficiency was then this early planting date and then decrease with our later planting dates. With those late planting dates, they're hitting reproductive and are typically very hot and dry months of the year, so it requires a lot more irrigation to be able to obtain some yield. In the early planting date, Group 3 was vastly greater than our Group 4s and 5s, but at the same time, when it is lagging behind in yield by 10 to 12 bushels, that's just not very palatable for our producers, not really a very valid option financially for our growers to be placing in that early planting date window. But the Group 4 and Group 5 were not different from one another within that early planting date. The next, again, within that mid-planting date, the Group 3 was still significantly better with water use efficiency. Due to that shorter season variety, it didn't require as much water to obtain the yield, but at the same time, again, the yield just wasn't quite there. But the Group 4 was still a great, greatly efficient at utilizing that water within that mid-planting date. And lastly, in the late planting date, there was no differences with our water use efficiency, and it being hot and dry. And in 3 years of this study, we've seen everything from extremely hot and dry and below average rainfall in 2015 to fairly normal year in 2016 to this past year. As you all well know, that we had excessive amounts of rainfall. So we ran this study on a wide range of climatic years, and it's separated out continually as such. So to kind of cap this off, it all comes down to dollars and cents to our producers. So the economic net return above our not only sensor packages and riser cost, but also the cost of irrigation, seed, and things of that nature. Within the early planting date, the Group 5 had significantly more net return than the other maturity groups. But then again, just by postponing planting by 2 weeks due to whatever might occur, there's a significant reduction in your return with that Group 5, but yet the Group 4 was still able to have a great net return within that mid-planting date. But also, Group 3, I just want to note, still significantly less than that Group 4, but at the same time, within this mid-planting date and potentially even a later planting date, Group 3 had very good water use efficiency, especially within this mid-planting date. So that could be something that in the future, if increased regulations come down, that could be a valid option to better kind of remain under permitted values if they are to decrease in years to come. So that could be noted and potentially something that can be utilized later if anything ever does happen. And then lastly, with the late planting date, Group 4 was significantly better than every other maturity group, but just not as quite a huge net return there with that late planting date. So moving on, looking at a row spacing by plant population study. This was some of my research that we've done over 2 years, and Dr. Orlowski and I think Dr. Irby as well has done a lot of row spacing studies. And over these 3 years, we had one treatment, which was an 80-inch wide bed. So we had 80-inch wide bed, and we put 4 20-inch row spacings on top of that, compared to just a normal, conventional 40-inch single. And in both years, we've seen a 4 to 5% yield increase just by going sub-30s, and that's been kind of fairly consistent with what Dr. Orlowski has been doing. He has several grad students doing this similar work, and they are seeing the same things. That going sub-30s, we're seeing about a 4 to 8% yield increase by just moving into a narrow row configuration. So next, kind of the riser cost per year. One of the first kind of tools that we have available is computerized hole selection. Next is surge irrigation, and then lastly soil sensors. I'm going to kind of hit on each of these individually. But we've gotten with our economists on station and figured out that the annual cost per acre for these packages to be implemented on a farm is about $8.20. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Talk about Pipe Planner and computerized hole selection. Is a free program offered by Dr. Plastics and Pipe Planner. It gives you a recommendation, almost a prescription for your fields, that gives you a type and size of the poly tubing to utilize, the size and quantity of holes for that field. It improves our application efficiency when this program is utilized, and we're looking at about $10 per acre of savings when this program has been used on fields. Again, it's a free tool. It is out there and available. A great program that can be at your disposal. Next, looking at surge valves. And with anybody that is not familiar with the surge valve, it's a piece of equipment that literally has a butterfly valve that swaps water from one portion to the field to another. So it'll send pulse shots down. So while one side is irrigating, the valve will switch and irrigate the other set, so that while that second set is being irrigated with water from that first set, settling into the soil profile, and then in the subsequent second pulse shot down that first irrigation, water moves rapidly across that wetted front, so it improves our soil infiltration, reduces irrigation time, and it's just a great tool to utilize, especially on cracking clays and sealing silt-loam soils. So it reduces our surface runoff losses, it decreases deep percolation losses. So with surface runoff losses, we're able to minimize the amount of water that we have running off into the tail ditch at the end of the field. And then we're decreasing our deep percolation losses by up there towards the front of the irrigation set, where by sending these pulse shots, we're not just oversaturating the soil there close to the polypipe at the front of the field. It improves our infiltration on sealing soils. As anybody that's ever dealt with these sealing soils, they can be tortured to try and get water into the soil profile. So this intermittent application of water greatly improves our water infiltration with these soils. And then through the last part of surge irrigation, when we have kind of a soak phase, you're able to bring that soil profile up to the desired recharge rate. And when this tool has been utilized, we're seeing application efficiency of 25% greater than when compared to just normal conventional irrigation. So we're able to irrigate more effectively, do so while utilizing less water and also in a more timely manner. And continue on with surge, where it really shines greatly is on cracking clay soils. So some evidence that we've been doing indicates that our irrigation efficiency is approaching 30%. However, that is kind of a function of furrow length. So this has been done on farm evaluations that we had runs ranging from 600 feet up to a little under 2,000 feet. So at 600 feet, we're having about a little under 10% better efficiency when compared to conventional methods. But where a surge valve really starts to shine is with these longer runs. It is able to get down to the end of the furrow while using less water in a more timely manner. So really, with these long runs, it is far superior to our conventional methods of trying to irrigate those long fields. And we'll move on. So we'll move on into kind of soil moisture sensors, and we've done a lot of work with various kinds, and probably most comfortable with tensiometers. It's something we utilize a lot. We've done a lot of research with. So to kind of give a background of how these tensiometers work, a saturation is 0 centibars, and these tensiometers give us readings of soil moisture sensor in centibars. And so saturation is, imagine you have a kitchen sponge, you plunge it into a sink, you pick it up, and it's just dripping wet. That's saturation. Your field cannot withhold any more water. Field capacity is typically around 30 to 35 centibars, so the gravitational water has drained from the field. So if you let that sponge sit for a second, and after the water stops dripping out of the sponge, water that remains is held against gravitational forces. Same thing with your soil profile and your field. And the main purpose of these soil moisture sensors is to be able to find and fine-tune our irrigation management strategies with looking at our 50% max allowable deficit, and that is between field capacity to permanent wilting point. And permanent wilting point is simply, there's moisture in your soil profile, but the soil particles are holding onto that moisture so tightly it's not plant available. Your roots cannot access it. So utilizing the soil moisture sensors are able to fine-tune that and take a lot of guesswork out of our irrigation. And this is a kind of a little snapshot of what it looks like in season. So the blue line is a 6-inch sensor, red line is a 12-inch sensor, and then a 24-inch sensor is that orange line. So we typically, with our soybeans, we install these moisture sensors. We put 3 in at depths of 6, 12, and 24 inches. And they take a lot of guesswork out of what kind of moisture content you have in your soil profile, but it also shows your ability to infiltrate and if your irrigation is adequately recharging your soil profile. and also gives you a little brief glimpse into your active rooting zone. So you're able to see where your roots are pulling from and what depths. So this is just an example that you begin to have soil available moisture depleting, gets to a threshold level, and irrigation is made, and we're able to recharge the soil profile even down to that 24-inch sensor. So our irrigation event was successful. We recharged soil profile. So these soil moisture sensors, again, it's a great tool. It takes a lot of guesswork out of when to irrigate and if your irrigations are going out properly. And can't say enough about taking and giving you a glimpse into what's actually going on into your field soil profile. So this is another study that we've done for 3 years, and this is looking at season-long cinnabar thresholds. Currently, some previous work that Dr. Kreutz had done, he established a season-long recommendation threshold of 75 cennibars on long-textured soils. We felt like that might be slightly conservative. We felt like we might be able to push that, so we established this study, and we used season-long cinnabar thresholds of 50, 85, and 125. 50 for producers that typically do not utilize either soil moisture sensors, or if they default to a calendar schedule where they irrigate maybe every 6 or 7 days, that very well coincides with a 50 centibar threshold. That 50 typically hits when it's hot and dry every 5 to 6 days, so that follows very closely to kind of common producer practice in our area, so that's why we have that in there. 85, which is what we felt like we would be able to push it to, and then 125, we knew we would be able to get a lot of plant stress during that time. And this was, again, planted early within our area on a silt loam soil. And with that early planting date, we never even hit that 125 centibar threshold. I think 2015, the highest it got was about 120. And then the past 2 years, the highest it's got is about 110, 112 when rainfall and cooler temperatures kind of prevailed. But ultimately, kind of a common belief is that when producers adopt these irrigation management practices that it'll decrease yield, it'll affect their yield, whatever it may be. But by utilizing this season-long 85 centibar threshold, we cut equivalent yield than when we used a 50 centibar threshold. And to look at those two further, at water sufficiency, that tells a great story. So we were able to attain equivalent yield by utilizing less than half the amount of water. So using these soil moisture sensors, I cannot just harp on it enough that it not only tells you when to irrigate, it tells you how effectively to irrigate. And I think this really shows that some common practices might be putting a lot of irrigation events down a field when it is not needed or can't be properly utilized by a plant. So again, we've carried this out further to some on-farm evaluations. Mr. Mark Henry in the back conducted a lot of these trials. I think it was done over 4 years, if I remember right. And this was done across 20 farms in Mississippi, Arkansas. So we've taken this from looking at it on a small plot scale, where we have 100-foot long plots, now applying it on farms with fields ranging from 10 to 80 acres. In all 4 years, we cut equivalent yield. So again, it kind of debunks the common myth and mindset that utilizing these practices will cost yield. That was not observed. So we were able to obtain similar yield while utilizing less water in all cases, and also improve the net return for our producers. And I'm sure, Mr. Henry, you probably know off the top of your head how many times a producer went behind you and cut irrigation on when they weren't supposed to. And so, kind of giving a background of these, we did side-by-side evaluations. One farmer irrigates their field according to their common practices, however they've been doing it, and we come in and set up computerized hole selection, soil moisture sensors, surge valves, whatever tools we needed for that field to irrigate. Mr. Henry was irrigating that one set, farmer would irrigate the other, and I can't tell you how many times they would come out there and see plants being stressed, saying they're losing yield, it's costing them money, and they would go and cut the well on. So that's just again, I can't say that enough. It's starting to get better, it's definitely improving, but that was a mindset that we've had to battle quite often, is that these practices do, in fact, cut equivalent yield, but we're able to do so utilizing less water. So in conclusion, really plant early. This has been preached on more times than we can count. I know it's been pounded into everybody's minds, but it is just consistent that getting in early gives us the highest yield potential and irrigation water use efficiency and net return. Being able to allow those plants to go into reproductive stages when it's a little bit cooler and typically maybe a little bit wetter in the summertime just greatly benefits us. Next, maturity group selection. Within an early planting date, a group 5 is a great choice, as well as a group 4. Within a mid to later planting date, a group 4 is quite optimum. And another kind of mindset and practice in our area is when growers have to plant later, double crop behind wheat. They'll typically plant a group 5 with the mindset that it would be able to carry through staying in vegetative stages through July and August, where it's really hot, really dry, and then hopefully hit reproductive when there's a little more rainfall, a little cooler temperatures. We've conducted this for 3 years. We have not been able to see that. But so maturity group selection would further optimize our irrigation management strategies and practices. Yield increase with going narrow rows. It's been out there. Midwest has done tons of research on this. We're starting to do a lot of research as well that consistently going less than 30-inch rows, we're seeing 4 to 8% yield increase just by changing up the plant configuration within that field. Allows for a yield increase, a little more rapid canopy closure, just a lot of added benefits with going to those narrow row systems. Next and lastly, utilize the tools available. Pure asshole selection, again, it is a free program that can be implemented on your field. If you have difficult to irrigate fields, irregular shaped fields, whatever it may be, just please utilize this tool available and it will automatically end up saving you money and improving your irrigation efficiency. Surge valves, again, on sealing silt loams and cracking clays, where particularly long furrow lengths, it is a great tool to be available to use. And lastly, soil moisture sensors. Again, just takes a lot of the guesswork, lets you know what's going on in your soil profile, and also when to initiate irrigations, which can very often be a very difficult thing to judge, is when to turn the water on. And moisture sensors take a lot of that guesswork out and improve our irrigation management practices. And with that, I'd like to thank the Soybean Promotion Board, our grad students and committee workers for all their help with this research. And I'd love to answer any questions.
Wilks, on your group 5s, back up in your presentation where you showed group 5s have a higher net return, what all did you account for that monetarily? There's some more risk associated with those group 5s.
So for the net return, we accounted for just the return above specific irrigation costs, seed costs, and also herbicide costs. So it was spring burn down and herbicide applications in season, then just the cost of irrigation to run the pump and things of that nature.
You never ran into any late insect pressure, disease pressure that cost you any more money?
With those, we didn't, but we factored that in with later planting dates. Within the early planting date window, I never hit threshold in any year on any pest, but where that really kind of stood out was in that late planting date. The group 5s in 2 different years, we've had to make first year we made a soybean looper application when the group 3s and group 4s were already past the point of needing an insecticide application. The group 5 was still late R5, early R6, and we were getting hammered. So we factored in that insecticide application. And this past year we had to make a ram-bedded stink bug application when the other maturity groups were terminated.
But that was your late planting?
Yes, sir. That was just late planting. Not in the early.
So the money you showed was about $50 on the early planting group 5?
Yes, sir. Now it's simply just across 3 years, just the amount of yield that those group 5s were able to obtain higher than the group 4s.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
On the back on, I guess what was the word used on that? We had 50 and 85, 125 to 85. What do you call that?
Season long Cinnabore thresholds.
Cinnabore threshold.
Yes, sir.
How's that? How do you figure that out? Is that formulated based
Sure.
off the different sensors at 6, 12, 24, or? that
Yes, sir.
average
It's,
or
it's a
something?
weighted average. So
Weighted average, okay.
it's a weighted average. So early in the season, you can go out and check your moisture sensors, and say up until about R3, your 6 and 12 inch sensor, you'll take you'll multiply both of those readings by 0.5 to get that weighted average. But then around R3, R4, you begin to see that 24 inch sensor begin to decrease. So you have an active rooting zone going down to that level. So then at that point, you take multiply your 6 inch and your 12 inch by a quarter, and then you take half of your 24 inch reading.
Yeah,
So-
where could a person, do you have to manually figure that on a case-by-case basis for each field based on your soil sensor? Or does a system like pipe planter, does it determine that, or you have to?
We have there's various packages that you can use, or I guess
Is that formula written down anywhere where somebody knows how to do it?
yes, sir. We have plenty of bulletins and things
I know
available.
That's a pretty thing.
and,
That's a pretty important thing to know, right?
it is,
Soil
and-
sensors is one thing, but for you to really maximize water efficiency at the end of the year, you need to be staying at 85, right?
Yes, sir.
Can you click back to that slide? I think
Absolutely.
it's the same slide I'm thinking about too.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. But then when you go back over to where it showed the results of the how much more or less water you used right there. So that A column, you've got your over on your left. What's this over here?
That is our irrigation water use efficiency.
Okay.
So for each acre inch of water that we applied using this threshold, we're getting about 2.5 bushels. Yeah, with each acre inch of water that we're applying for this 85, we're getting about 7.5 bushels.
All right, and click back to the graph slide if you don't mind, please.
Which one would that be?
The individual moist probe show sensor.
Yes, sir.
Right
No.
there, right there.
You can see how your 12 and your 24 moisture was pretty close together. I know your 6 and 24
Yes, sir.
were real close together.
That's where you got a rain on that first one.
Yeah, we got a small range, so we still have a little bit. And then this 24 inch sensor profile, it's still, there's not a ton of active roots going down at that depth. So there's still a lot of soil available moisture. But that's mainly, we caught a short rain here, so it was able to recharge at 6, yet it didn't percolate down to the 12 inch sensor.
And a lot of that has to do with soil type. too.
Yes, sir. Very much so. Very much so. So this, I don't know if I might have failed to mention that. So these, the 85 centibar threshold is recommended for our loam textured soils. And then for our clay textured soils, we're sitting closer to 100 centibars. And again, that 85 is for an early planting date. We're going to have to do some further studies to kind of carry that out to see if that holds true. And we might do some further evaluations on clay soils, but we definitely feel good about the 85 and the 100 centibar thresholds as of right now.
All right, so I got one question. Tell me, on that graph, where's your most active root zone?
On this graph,
Yep.
I would say it is slightly past 6 and between 6 and 12.
Just all the way across the graph. What's your most active root zone all the way across that graph?
It's on the axis
Yeah,
going the
this
opposite
is-
way of the graph.
Correct.
As it grows.
So this is,
Right,
so
as
as the season long
what's
grows,
your most active root?
prior to about right here, which is towards the end of June, it would be your 12 inch, and then right after kind of late June, you start having that 24 inch, and that's where your massive active root zone would be. Is deeper in the soil profile, that plant is getting close to physiological maturity. So that's when we shift that weighted average so heavy to that 24 inch sensor, because we rely heavily on it. So that's where the massive amount of our active root growth is during that time. And again, we can go on further, but we've also seen a lot that, and I'll go ahead and point this out, that with these moisture sensors, you may think it's kind of stepping fairly consistently. So for example, if you go out after a rain or an irrigation and your average is 50, you go out maybe another 6 days later, you'd be sitting around 60. So you think it kind of stepping maybe a couple centibars each day. When it starts approaching 80, 85, that soil is beginning to dry down. There's a lot less available soil moisture. It can go from 85 to 95 in a day when it's hot and dry. So real care and caution needs to be taken there, especially during R5, R6. We'll really see that happening. That's when we can have a lot of drought stress affect yield. And I didn't have time to show it today, but with drought stress in that R5, R6 growth stage, if you delay irrigation or cannot have a timely irrigation, you could be sitting at 8% yield decrease when that goes for a span of 5 to 6 days. So that's just, again, these moisture sensors are great in being able to not only know when to irrigate, but also help time and determine when to irrigate based upon your irrigation sets, your wells, what you can commit to, things of that nature.
It is also showing the maximum uptake is around 12 inches. The maximum uptake, the plant uptake of water is taking place at 12 inches.
During the early season, yes, sir. So during
Is it not in minus kilopascal?
it is centibars and kilopascals are the same.
Not a negative?
Yes, it shows that it's negative, but for
So
just the purpose of this talk.
So more means it's less water. And this and try to correct, isn't it? So more kilopascal means less water.
Correct. Yes, sir.
So
With the increasing kilopascals, that is less plant available moisture.
yeah, so 12 inches is less water. So that's the place where maximum uptake is taking place. Plant takes up, so less water there.
All right, you're saying due to the stepping that the active root zone is within that 12-inch profile? Right. But there's a lot of different factors that come into that, and again, that can be evapotranspiration, things of that nature with the soil profile. So really, when you hit that R4 or 5 growth stage, the bulk of your root growth is down further.
Yeah, this figure is slightly confusing for me because, tension is always negative, so we just plotted it positive. So this means less water, y direction.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
It takes a little getting used to it and a little playing with.
I was gonna say with those
Yeah, add to it.
those watermark sensors, it's inverted, that's why it's not negative tension.
Yeah.
With the watermark sensors, it's inverted, that's why it's,
Those are true?
the watermark sensors, they're inverted,
The values are, that's why it's not negative.
that's why it's not negative.
Okay. I have no experience in that. So. Because 0 is, kilopascal means there is maximum potential. 0. If you take plants, plant plants, 0. Anything, which is tension less than the maximum is negative. So plants will have, a leaf you take, it's like negative 50 kilopascal, like that. So that's means less water. So this, I don't know how they invert it. You may be right.
Well, I was just saying, the way that the watermark sensors read,
Yeah,
it's,
that's it.
The calculation's already made.
Yeah, I believe.
Anything else?